Resourceful Designer, episode 205, the definitive guide to starting a home-based design business, part 2, business plans and your workspace.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. His favorite thing about working from home was being there for his kids. Mark Dicote.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love it that you want to spend a little bit of time with me as we discuss starting and running a graphic design business. Now, in this week's episode, I'm going to discuss your business plan as well as a little bit about your workspace. I'm also going to share a tip of the week that may help you with startup costs before ending the episode with a question from Cynthia about design contracts. Now, what have I been up to this past week? Well, I did finish a couple of podcast cover arts and did a little bit more work on some websites. I had a little bit of problem with the backing up of my websites. I use Backup Buddy and iTheme Sync in order to sync everything. And Backup Buddy backs up to a remote server, Stash Live, which is all part of iThemes. And I noticed that my sites weren't being backed up, or it had been over a week since they had been backed up. They're usually backed up on a regular basis, but it had been over a week. So I looked into it, I contacted them, and they told me that yes, there had been an issue, it shouldn't have been a problem, but they gave me the remedy, which was pretty straightforward to do. I just had to go through to all the sites and kind of give them a little jump start to get the backups going again. So, minor issue, it took me about an hour to fix, but that was something like normally my virtual assistant takes care of all that stuff for me, and she's the one that notified me and says, these sites haven't been backed up in over a week, and that's not normal. So I looked into it and got it all fixed. So that was one thing I did. Now, I'm not actually taking on any new jobs this week. As you may or may not know, I'll be at a podcast conference next week promoting my company, podcastbranding.co. So I've told all clients at this point that I'm not starting anything before I leave. Everything will be picked up once I'm back. And I am sorry to report that I did lose a very long-time client. This is a client that I initially designed all their branding for them in 2006, 2007, built their first website. Then in 2015, built a new website, a responsive website on WordPress for them. And just last year, designed a brand new brand for the company. It completely changed everything. Now, what happened was when I started working, I was working with the father. It was his business. I've been working with him for years. And then last year, the son took over. And it was in the transition period when the father was leaving. He thought maybe a new brand would be in order for his son to take over. So I developed a new brand for them. But now the son let me know that he has a friend of his who's a designer and he's going to be using him from now on. So it's one of those things. What can you do? The father and I had a really great relationship, but the son and I never really connected that much. So it's a long-time client going back to 2007. That I'm sorry to see go, but I let him know that if there's ever anything I can help him with in the future, I'll be there for him. That's just the way things go when you're running a business. Now I want to share a tip of the week for you. And this is a tip for if you're just starting out your business, or maybe if you're trying to grow your business. And that is to look into your local municipality, your local government, even your maybe wider, your state or provincial or even federal government, to see if there are any grants available to help you with startup costs. There are a lot of organizations out there that offer money to businesses who are starting out, and most people don't know about this available money. I was just recently on the selection committee for our local business startup session. They had $50,000 that they were dividing up into smaller chunks and handing it out to new startups. And I was on the committee that graded each one. They went over their business plans, their financials, and sat through a short interview with each one to decide who deserves to get the grant money or not. And this is just my community. There's money like this all over the place that you can apply for, especially if you are diverse in any way. I know in my area, there's special grants if you are starting a French-based business. And some organizations are offering grants depending on your ethnic background. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're starting your business, inquire, find out. There may be money. It might only be a couple $100s, but it could be several $1,000s that can help you out. And it may be the difference on whatever computer you might want to get on buying the bottom of the line or getting a top-end model. So whether you're just starting out or maybe you're planning on expanding because there are grants for expansions as well, look into it. You never know what could happen. And now, the definitive guide to starting a home-based design business, part 2. Now, in last week's episode, I talked about whether or not running a home-based design business is for you and things to consider before actually deciding to start one. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode, I suggest you start there. This week, I'm making the assumption that you've made the decision and that you're going to go ahead with your plans to start your own business, and I'm now going to discuss the next steps in the process. Now, first off, some startup advice. Let me state that there is a cost involved with starting any business, even one that you run from home. You may not be paying to lease office space, but you will still need to fork out some money to get your design business started. And some of those costs may include stuff like maybe a separate phone number to keep your business and personal communication separate. And if you do, preferably a plan that has voicemail, call display, and the whole works. You know how important call display is for when you're screening those calls. You know, you're deep in the middle of some design project and you don't want to be distracted. So you look over, say, I don't want to talk to them, and you keep on working. Come on, we've all done it. And of course, you'll need a computer and the various design softwares required to do your work. And then, of course, there's things such as your desk and your chair and maybe bookshelves and possibly a filing cabinet. Just stuff to furnish your office. And then don't forget your internet. If web design is part of your services, or if you regularly work on large print files, you may want to increase your internet plan for more bandwidth. Now, other costs with starting a business include things like business cards. I know we're living in a digital world, but you really should have business cards to hand out anyways. And maybe you'll even want to get some printed flyers or brochures to help spread the word about your new endeavor. Remember back in episode 161 when I talked about the intro packet and how good it is for onboarding clients? Well, you might want to invest some of your startup money in an intro packet. Plus, there's all the fees involved with business licenses and permits, accounting and legal fees, memberships, clubs, and communities, perhaps something like the Resourceful Designer community, where you pay to be amongst your peers and people who are willing to help you on that road to get started. So yes, starting a home-based design business is the least costly option to begin your entrepreneurial life, but there's still a startup cost involved. And you'll probably need a little bit of a cash buffer just to tide you over as you build up your clientele. Because at the start, money won't be rolling in. You need to get those clients. You need to start designing for them, and you have to wait for them to pay you. So it's always nice to start off a business with a little bit of a buffer put aside, some savings maybe, to help you at the beginning when things are a little rough. Now here are some suggestions to help you with costs. First, set a long-term goal to acquire some of these things, which allows you to spread out the cost. You don't need to get everything all up front to start with. Think that over the course of a year or two, I'm going to get these things. Only buy what you absolutely need right now. And whenever possible, you can always buy used or sometimes refurbished. That'll save you some money. Or even purchase the lesser model. There's no reason for you to buy the top-of-the-line computer when a model that's a year or two old is perfectly adequate for the work that you do. Try to make do with what you have and what you can currently afford, and then grow that stuff along with your business. For the first 2 years that I ran my business from home here, I sat at a desk that I actually picked out of the trash bin at the printer that I used to work at. They had got rid of it when one of the legs broke and had thrown it in the bin. And I brought our van over there, dug it out of the bin, threw it in the back of the van, brought it home. I actually had to replace one of the legs. I just put a 2x4 there temporarily. But that got me by for almost 2 years until I was able to acquire a better desk, the desk that I have now. Now, just in case you're interested, the desk that I'm actually using, I bartered this desk in exchange for a website for a client. There was a new client that came my way. He was a woodworker. He did a lot of wood turning and other woodwork. And he didn't have the money for a proper website, so we made an exchange. I would build him a website. In exchange, he would build me a desk. The only thing I did was I paid for the wood itself. But all his time and everything was covered with the cost of the website. But it took me 2 years of working on a trash desk, if you want to call it that, before I got this one. Now, if you want to know more about bartering your services, that's not what I'm talking about today, but I did have an episode 47 of the podcast, was all about bartering your services and how you can use that. I know another designer that almost furnished his entire house through bartering. So all of this to say that keep in mind that even though you're starting a home-based design business, there's still costs involved in the beginning to get things off the ground. So now let's talk about business plans. A business plan is a written document describing the aspects of your proposed business. Although not absolutely necessary to start a business plan can help you when it comes to making business decisions, and it can keep you focused and on the right path when your thoughts start to stray in different directions. Now, creating a business plan is a worthwhile exercise, even if you don't need one, because it helps you think through your ideas. It helps you focus on what needs to be done and to identify what information or assistance you still need to go out and get. What it all comes down to is a business plan will improve your chances of success by setting out realistic goals and financial projections that you can then measure against your progress as time goes by. Plus, if you're planning on securing any sort of startup loan or applying for a grant, like I mentioned in the tip of the week, you will need a business plan. Now, there are various ways to write a business plan, none of them right or wrong. There's just a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And if you're doing this just for yourself, you can choose whatever method you want. However, if you are creating a business plan because you need to get a loan or a grant, before starting, I suggest you reach out to whatever organization, the bank or whoever is giving out the grant, and ask them what's their preferred format, because they will have a way to lay it out that they want you to follow. And it'll save you a lot of time. You don't have to reformat and move stuff around or stuff. You'll already have it in the format they want. So it'll save a lot of trouble in the long run. Now, there are plenty of online resources that help you with business plans. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, and you can use them to write your plan. But if you want to just give it a go on your own, here are just a few general elements that you should include in a business plan. First off, there's background information. You should include your business concept. Describe the services that you plan on offering in your design business. List every little thing that you plan on doing. You can also perform a SWOT analysis on your business. Now, I talked about SWOT analysis in episode 202 of the podcast and how you can use them for a design project, but you can use the same principle on your design business to figure out what your strengths, your weaknesses, your obstacles and threats are to the business that you're starting. Now, another section of a business plan is for operations. You need to describe your working environment, what sort of equipment and supplies that you already have or those that you need to acquire, and be sure to mention whatever costs are involved with those, and as well as listing any suppliers or contractors or people that you may be working with. Then there's a marketing section that describes the industry and the target market you're going after. So explain who you think your clients are going to be. Talk about how you plan on selling your services, what sort of ideas you're going to use to go after that target market, and mention what sort of strategies you have in place or that you're thinking of to gain new clients. And finally, there's a financial section to a business plan, and that should include a financial statement showing the startup costs, how much everything's going to cost, how much it's going to run you on a monthly basis. So things like internet, your heating, water, if you pay for water, electricity, and all that stuff, even your rent or property taxes and all that. So all your regular expenses, you need to know what that stuff is going to be, as well as possible projected sales forecasts. How much do you think you're going to make in the first couple of months? How much are you going to make monthly after that? Financial projections, as well as how much you're actually investing in the business. Do you have money saved up that you're putting in? Well, how much? That should be in your financial plan. How much money do you have that you're investing? If you're taking out a loan, mention how much the loan is going to be for. If you have a line of credit that's available, maybe you're not going to use it, but it's there as a backup, mention how much do you have in your line of credit that you can use. As well, in the financial section, you need to state how you plan on paying yourself. Whenever you're running any sort of business, some of the money you collect goes back towards the business and some of it goes to you. So what percentage are you taking? How much are you going to take from your revenue, and how are you going to go about paying yourself? That's all part of the business plan. Now, of course, there is a lot more that goes into a business plan, but I want to just give you a quick idea of how to lay one out. But if you want to plan one, just do a search for graphic design or web design business plan, and there are plenty of resources online that can help you with that. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is your actual workspace. I touched on it briefly last episode, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper. If at all possible, your workspace, when running a home-based business, should be separate from the rest of your home. It should be a separate part of your home dedicated solely to your business. That way, it helps you feel like you are, quote unquote, going to work, and at the end of the workday, it feels like you're leaving work. It makes it much easier to separate your work from your family life. My office, I know I come here in the morning, and at the end of the day, I don't usually, after dinner, after supper, I don't normally come back into my office. And if I do, I guarantee my wife is going to say, "Are you working tonight?" Because that's what we've associated the office with. The office is where I work. Now, another reason to keep a separate place in your home for your office is you can do things like, if you have a business phone and it's in your office, you can ignore it during non-office hours. I personally have a landline that is my business phone. I have my cell phone and a house phone, but I've got a landline for my business phone here, and I ignore it during off hours. Now, another reason to have a dedicated space in your home is for any important papers or materials. You're going to get bills, you're going to get clients will give you papers and other things. And having your own office means that those things won't get mixed up with your family or your personal things and possibly get misplaced or lost. If they're in your office, you're the only one that touches them, so you are in control. Plus, if you do have a family, your family will know that when you're in your office, you're at work and shouldn't be disturbed. Now, this was a huge bonus for me when I was just starting out because my kids were fairly young at the time. And when they get home from school, they knew that if I came out and greeted them, great, they can talk and all that stuff. But if I was in my office, I wasn't to be disturbed. So even if they got off the school bus, came in, they would see if dad's in his office, we'll be quiet and all that until dad comes out. And they would respect that. And if I didn't have a dedicated place in my home, that might have been a lot harder. It was a lot easier for them to see that dad's at his computer in his office. Don't disturb him right now. Plus, having your own dedicated office space makes it very easy come tax time if you have to deduct office space, as you get to claim the square footage of your space as part of your taxes. Now, a few more things to consider. If you do want to use a landline like I do for your business, make sure there's a phone line in your designated office space. Are there enough electrical outlets to accommodate everything in the space that you want to use? Think about it. You have a computer that needs to be plugged in, at least one monitor. I personally have two. I have my printer, I have my router, and that's not counting all my podcast equipment and other things. Even my landline phone has features that requires it to be plugged in. So I had to make sure, and when we built this house, I made sure to put extra outlets in this room because I knew it was going to be my office. So whatever space you're thinking of choosing, make sure it has enough electrical outlets to accommodate all your equipment. Now, will whatever furniture you have fit in that location? It's nice to have a desk and all that, but what happens if your space is too small and not everything you have fits? And what about lighting? If you're going to be working there on a regular basis, you want to make sure you have proper lighting. Now, I'm lucky I've got a big window here in my office. But even when it gets dark, I made sure I had ample lighting to properly light up my space so it's not a strain. Now, another thing to consider is just how noisy will it be in your space? It's one thing to have a nice designated space to work, but if you're right next to the laundry room and the washer and dryer going and it's driving you crazy because you can hear them, or you're right next to the family room where the kids are going to be playing the TV and it's going to bother you, that might cause a problem. So how much noise actually will affect you working in that space? Now, I mentioned room for your furniture, but what about room just to spread out your work? Do you have enough counter space? I'm lucky that this desk that I have here is a 7-foot long desk. It's huge. So I have lots of space here to put stuff down. Plus I have a filing cabinet and another cabinet. So I have counter space that I can put stuff down on. Because sometimes it's nice. You might have this big sheet of paper, this big poster thing that a client might give you that you need to lay out and measure and do stuff with. So make sure you have enough counter space in your office. And what about storage space? It's nice to have counter space, but what about place to store all that stuff? Do you have enough drawers, cabinets, shelves? Or is that stuff you're going to have to include? And is your workspace ergonomically designed to prevent stuff like sore necks or backs or eye strain? Is everything set up? If you're going to be there sitting for 8 hours a day, if not more, is it going to be comfortable for you or is it going to cause a problem? These are all things to think about in your workspace. And finally, is the place suitable for clients to visit? I talked briefly about that last episode. But if you're planning on inviting clients to your office, you have to make sure that your office is suitable and that you have the proper seating for the clients as well. So these are just a few things that you might want to consider as you're setting up your office. So that's what I wanted to discuss this week, both the business plan and just your workspace. Now, in part 3 of this series, next week, I'm going to talk about the legalities of running a business from your home, as well as touch briefly on marketing your new endeavor. So be sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss that episode. Now, I would love to know your thoughts on this topic. Please leave me a comment by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 205. And now this week's question of the week. And this week's question comes in from Cynthia. She says, I have 1 semester left of design school, and I'm starting to get commissions here or there. I plan to work for somebody after I graduate, and then I'd like to start my own freelance business. I was wondering if you have or could point me in the direction of a generic graphic design contract. I'm not really sure where to start with that. Well, thank you for the question, Cynthia, and congratulations on first finishing design school and on your thoughts of working for somebody else after you graduate before starting your business. I suggest everybody work for somebody before working on your own. You will learn so much that way. I know that my business would not be a success if I had not worked for the print shop beforehand. So kudos to you for thinking along those lines. Now, as for design contracts, first off, I'm going to say I'm not a lawyer. I just want to put that out there. And I do suggest that you contact a lawyer. That is the best bet for getting a proper contract. But you are a student, and I know that students have limited budget when it comes to things. So here are a couple of things that you may want to check out. One of them, and I'm going to include the links for this in the show notes to this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 205 if you want to get the links. But there is a great contract. It's free, and it's called Contract Killer. And I'll share the website here, but this is why I said I'm going to have the links in the show notes. The website is stuffandnonsense.co.uk/projects/contract-killer. Now, this is a free contract that you can use. These people at Stuff and Nonsense were nice enough to put this out there, and you can edit it. In fact, the very first contract that I used was based on this, and there are still some clauses from this that are included in my current contract today. So it is quite popular, and it allows you to go in and modify. You just copy it, and then you put in whatever program, modify it the way you want, but it explains it really nicely. Now, another thing, I haven't personally used this, but a lot of people I've heard of have, and that's hellobonsai.com. And they offer all sorts of things, contracts and that. And if you go to hellobonsai.com/freelance-contracts, they have, well, contracts for freelancers there. I believe they also have templates for business plans, but I didn't check that. I really should have, but I believe they do. So those are 2 options for you, Cynthia. There are lots more. If you just wanted to Google graphic design contracts or web design contracts, you'll get a whole bunch of them. But I know that the Contract Killer one is very popular and has been used by a lot of people, myself included. It's very well written. And when my lawyer finally wrote out my true contract, the one I'm using now, there was many things from my original one that he said were very well done, so he decided to keep them. Most of the other stuff, it just pertains, it's a little different because every business is a little different, so your contract's going to have to be a little different. But that one there is a great foundation to start with, especially when you're new. So thank you very much for that question, Cynthia. I hope it helps you. And if you have a question you would like me to answer in a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback to submit yours. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to continuing the discussion next week with you as I continue my definitive guide to starting a home-based design business. Until then, I am Mark Dacote wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.